Successfully strategically planning your finances has its benefits. It allows you to construct a roadmap or a game plan for long-term financial solvency and peace of mind. However, it appears that a large number of Canadians stay up worried every night over their basic finances and meeting their needs. According to statistics from Salvation Army Canada, they found that 25% of all Canadians are worried about having enough income to meet their everyday expenses and cover their basic financial needs. That number jumps to 40% if we're talking about single parent households. And if you're single or a caregiver, those numbers come in at 31 and 30% respectively. And when we talk about planning for retirement, it appears that nearly half of all Canadians say they are behind in their retirement savings plan, according to a national survey published by H&R Block. 52% of Canadians say they feel unprepared for retirement because they don't have enough money left after their monthly expenses are paid to feel comfortable enough to set aside money to retire. Furthermore, the survey also revealed that Canadians plan on either getting another part-time job so that they can amass enough funds to comfortably call it quits in the workplace. This, my friends, is not a surprise to my friend Nathan Best. He serves as a financial advisor for Edward Jones. He helps busy corporate professionals and business owners plan for their retirement. He finds blind spots in their retirement plans to help them achieve their retirement goals. He believes in a lifelong partnership with his clients in order to hold them accountable and make sure that they realize their financial prosperity and maximizing every dollar they can towards their ultimate retirement. And Best join me this week to talk more about successfully planning for retirement, putting in place a plan that is sensible and has a forward-thinking direction. I'm Kevin McShann. Let's have this conversation. Ready, my friend, I'll take a moment to welcome you to the program, and I'm super excited to learn how you help corporate professionals and business owners make a better financial decisions as they plan for retirement. Great to see you, and happy Monday to you, my friend.
Happy Monday to you as well. Thanks for inviting me on, and appreciate the opportunity to speak with you. Let's. I'm ready to get into whenever you are.
Absolutely. Now, Nathan, I know as a financial advisor for Edward Jones, you help, as I said, corporate professionals and business owners plan for retirement, my friends. So tell me why that's so important and why you love what you do, my friends.
Well, essentially what we try to do is, we'll meet with a lot of folks like that. Like you said, corporate professionals and business owners are the two key demographics that our practice tends to focus our work on. And, as I've said to many people before, growing up, I didn't have a lot of this information as a youngster, and it wasn't naturally taught to us in our school systems. A lot of people still find this stuff very intimidating, balancing their money, making sure they're saving enough for their goals. Not to mention the general balance between short-term needs and short-term goals, those vacations that you want to take with your family, balancing your everyday bills, all that kind of stuff, but also balancing that with the long-term goals like your retirement, your kids' education, making sure your family's protected, tax planning. These are all things that we try to help our clients with and balance to help them make the better financial decisions that they can.
Yeah, and this is tell me why you think people have such a hard time managing their money in order for them to save for things like retirement and the more long-term goals. Why do you think so many Canadians have trouble saving money for the long term?
I would say the first, again, like kind of what I said a moment ago, my inclination is, again, it's not something that is easily. First of all, it's been almost an epidemic of lack of knowledge in our education system for generations. We don't get taught proper financial literacy in school. There's a lot of information that gets kind of left out until you reach out to a professional like myself or do your own research from, a trusted source. And like I said, the school systems don't teach it. Our parents don't have the financial literacy a lot of the time, so they're not able to teach it to their kids. And so it leaves people, when they're making that transition to adulthood, they're in a position of, where do I go from here to get this kind of information? That being said, in my experience, there are some free resources nowadays in the internet age, like Facebook groups, YouTube videos. Some content is available on other social media platforms like TikTok and Instagram, etc. But you have to also be careful because a lot of the time that information it's very easily summarized into 2 or 3 points, which may or may not be relevant to every person's situation. And B, it may not always be, 100% accurate. I think a lot of the time this information that we get out there online can just be sort of made into a sexier way because they want to get clicks and views and this kind of thing, but ultimately it's about finding the right resource for the right person at the right time.
Yeah, so building on that, what do you think is the key to making a smart financial decisions that really sets you up for the long term? What do you think is the key there?
I would say, first of all, having knowledge for yourself, definitely understanding financial literacy at a basic level. The number one thing I always talk to clients about and which I think is the bedrock of any strong financial plan, is cash flow. And I think a lot of the time you hear that term, but not everybody fully understands what it means. And it's basically just the idea that your money coming into your family or your business is greater than the money that's going out towards maintaining that family or that business. So, if your lifestyle commands you to spend, let's say $10,000 a month hypothetically, but your family is only bringing in $8,000 a month in income, say after taxes, then you're going to have a real problem on your hands because you're now getting to the point where ultimately more money is being spent than what's going out. You're going to end up going into debt to cover that shortfall. And obviously, the longer that continues, the more debt you start to accumulate. And this is one of the biggest problems that we have when it comes to, people going into debt, credit cards, lines of credit, refinancing their houses, all this type of stuff. And it's really a big part of what can make or break a financial picture. So you always got to make sure your income is greater than what's going out every month for your lifestyle. And then that excess is really what we try to help people with in terms of, do we put it towards making sure our family's protected with life insurance? Do we make sure that we put some money aside for our RSPs? Maybe there is some debt and we want to put a little bit onto accelerating that debt payoff, like increasing your mortgage payments or credit card payments or whatever that looks like.
Yeah, absolutely. And, Nathan, I know you work with people who may unintentionally and end up working more years than they were intended because they don't really have a financial plan to retire. So when someone comes into your office and says, I wanted to retire 5 years ago, but I still have to work because I don't have enough money to retire. I'm wondering what sort of a roadmap or path do you lead them down to make sure that they can make the financial decisions necessary for them to retire? What are your thoughts there?
I think there's two thoughts around this question, depending on what perspective you're looking at. So, for example, if you were, let's say you're a young person in their early 30s or even late 20s, you're thinking about retirement now, which may not be for another 25 or 30 years, versus someone who is sort of in what we sometimes refer to as the red zone of retirement, where you're in that maybe 5 to 10 years before retirement, or at least before your ideal retirement, or maybe you're even in those first 5 to 10 years of actual retirement. For the folks that are a little bit further out, they're in an amazing position because they've got a lot more time to achieve that retirement plan without having to put so much away. The one thing we also talk about when it comes to investment planning is the compounding of your money, meaning earning returns on returns on returns. So if I got just as a simple example, if I've got $100 that made me 5% last year, that $100 becomes 105. If I make another 5% on that, I'm now making another 5% on 105 versus the original 100. And I'm sure a lot of people understand this at a basic level, but what they don't appreciate is the amount of power that comes from compounding and not having to put so much into their retirement if they start early versus starting, say 5 years before. For the folks that are in those, later stages, sometimes their back can be up against the wall because their timeline is a lot shorter, meaning they've got to put a lot more away to achieve that retirement. I mean, ultimately, at the end of the day, what we try to do is figure out what is that magic number that they have to have put into their retirement portfolio. Is it $1 million? Is it $500,000? Is it $2 million? I mean, ultimately, that depends on what their lifestyle and time horizon is going to look like in retirement. And, basically, we have what's called our 5-step process. I'm sort of rambling here. I apologize, but our 5-step process is basically figuring out where are you now? Where do you want to be? And can you get there? Those are the first three pieces of that. And for folks that are younger, the can you get there is often a little bit more achievable than folks who might be, say, 5 years away from retirement or already past their ideal retirement age. So ultimately, looking at that process, we're trying to figure out, what do they need to have to get to their ideal retirement? If they can't get there, what are some amicable sacrifices that they can make in their retirement? Whether that be, maybe traveling a little bit less. Maybe they are okay to retire a little bit later in life, but still have that ideal lifestyle. For some people, maybe they are okay to work a little bit in retirement. And some people might also even be looking at, significant financial sacrifices down the road, like maybe downsizing their home. I mean, maybe they have this great big home that they have, raised their family in. But what happens if they haven't saved enough and maybe there comes a time when they're going to need to downsize so they can take some of that equity and put that into, funding their retirement, say in the later years?
Yeah, absolutely. And Nathan, I'm also curious to build on that discussion by asking you if someone was to lose their job, my friend, why do you think it's important for them to know how much cash they have on reserve as they look to reestablish their lives and really reestablish the goals that they set for retirement? Why do you think it's important for people to know how much cash they have in reserve? What are your thoughts there?
Great question. And so I guess my answer to this is, again, it's a two-part question or two-part answer. So number one, having a reserve, as you called it, for an unforeseen circumstance like a job loss, like an emergency house repair, maybe there's an emergency medical expense. Those types of things to me are not something that necessarily should come from their retirement plan. It should come from a separate chunk of money like an emergency savings plan. Generally speaking, I like to recommend 3 to 6 months of expenses in reserve as that emergency cash flow so that if there is a job loss or any other catastrophe, then we want to make sure that we've got some cash on hand that they can easily access when those events happen, because you don't know if you're going to be out of work for a month, 2 weeks, 3 months, 4 months. It could be a little while. So those are the other parts to that. And then again, um, uh, planning for those ideas ahead is a huge thing. Not using your retirement ideally is the best situation, because generally speaking, your retirement portfolio will be in different investments than an emergency savings plan. Obviously, you don't want to have an emergency savings plan in anything too volatile. So you don't want to put yourself in a position where, let's say hypothetically, if the market is down a little bit and you're at a point where you got to draw on your retirement savings to cover an emergency, you're now selling when the market is low, which is really the opposite of what you want to be doing. So it's important to have both an emergency plan and a long-term plan for your long-term goals.
Yeah, and just out of curiosity, my friend, our friends at the Salvation Army of Canada recently released a study that said 25% of Canadians don't have enough income to cover their basic needs and expenses. And if you're a single parent household, that number jumps to 40%. And if you are a caregiver of any type, it jumps to 31%. So I'm curious, when people are watching or listening to this, what are your best suggestions or advice when it comes to making financial sacrifices in the short term in order to affect our positive long-term planning? What are your thoughts on Canadians' abilities to cover basic expenses and long-term planning as well? What are your thoughts there?
Well, I'm sure you and your audience both know that things in Canada have not gotten any cheaper over the last couple of years. Inflation has been running quite high since 2022, and unfortunately, the cost of food, gas, utilities, all the essentials have gotten a lot more expensive over the last couple of years. And especially in situations like you're describing, a caregiver parent who maybe is supporting elderly parents, or they're parents of young children, single parents especially. Those people can have a lot more obligation to stretch their money out a little bit further when it comes to, limited income versus like a two income family. So ultimately, when you find yourself in one of those situations, or even if you're not in those situations, I would say it's good to regularly review your financials, see what you're spending your money on, maybe every month or every 3 months, to see, is there anything maybe that isn't giving me a lot of value for what I'm spending? Because here's what I find. I find a lot of the time there are these, I'll call them phantom expenses, things that we spend money on kind of on a whim that we don't really think about and how it's impacting our overall financial picture. A key example I would give, especially with families, would be, a family who maybe isn't always the best at planning out their meals ahead of time. And the next thing you know, they're constantly ordering from Uber Eats or a drive-through or things like that. So I would say the number one thing to think about is planning ahead, planning out your lifestyle, planning out your days, being intentional with where your money is going. To me is a huge one. I know my wife and I have gotten really intentional in our spending over the last 2 or 3 months, and it's made a huge difference in, having more money to ourselves and to our goals at the end of the month. The other thing too is, just knowing what your costs are and making sure you're not exceeding what your income is every month. We talked about cash flow earlier. Sometimes, there might be some short-term sacrifices that you have to make, but then once your financial situation does improve, and you're driven towards improving that situation, then maybe you can start to, spend a little bit more on lifestyle costs if you have the income to support it. But you also have to be careful, because when you're going down that route, there's what's called lifestyle creep, which essentially is where, my income gets better, my lifestyle gets better, my savings is either the same or less. I always encourage people, if you've got more money coming in every month, let's say you're getting raises on a regular basis, maybe some of your expenses are coming down. Like in my situation, we're coming to a point now where my youngest daughter is no longer going to be in daycare. She's going to be in the public school program in September. So, with those extra monies that we're saving on daycare costs, what's the most productive way of spending that extra money in our cash flow every month? So it's a fine balance, but ultimately, I would say the biggest thing is figure out what are you really spending money on that's giving you value, and what are some things that you could be reducing cost on that may not give you the same amount of value.
Yeah, absolutely. Nathan, I'm curious to ask you about why do you think it's important for people to know whether or not their company or workplaces support flexible retirement plans. Why is that so important?
Well, I think retirement plans from an employer is huge for anybody, whether it's a flexible plan or not. I mean, in my opinion, there's essentially two main types of retirement plans. There's what's called a group plan or a group RSP plan, often called a defined contribution plan. That's where a certain amount of money goes in from your paycheck, a certain amount goes in from your employer, and then whatever you have at retirement is going to dictate what your income capability is going to be like. Then there's also defined benefit plans, which are a lot harder to come by nowadays, where you know what you're going to get at retirement, but you don't necessarily know how much your employer is going to be putting into that plan. So there's flexibility in both. I don't want to get too into the weeds on this just because we could have a whole episode on this alone. But ultimately, anytime you have an opportunity to essentially get, some sort of retirement package from your employer, especially if there's a matching component, for example, if I'm putting in, say, 4% of my salary into an RRSP, my company is matching that 4%. I'm basically getting a 4% bump in my income for free from my employer into that plan. So taking advantage of that is huge. I think what's more important, though, is not necessarily the flexibility that's in the plan, but knowing what options are out there. There are levels of flexibility in both types of plans, so it's always good to sit down with somebody who understands this stuff, know what your options are, what are the pros and cons to the different options that are out there, and just being informed so that you can make an informed decision on what to do with your retirement.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know you're someone who believes that it's important to review and assess the way your retirement portfolio is doing or the way it should be doing because it's important to know those numbers, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. I tell my clients all the time, minimum once a year, we should be reviewing your portfolio. For those that may have a lot of moving parts in their portfolio, I would say maybe even twice a year is a good idea. And just making sure you're staying on top of that, because the more out of balance your portfolio can get, which naturally happens as the markets move up and down, certain companies do well while others don't do so well. Those regular reviews, either on your own or with an advisor, are huge to make sure that your portfolio is growing consistently and you're not taking on unnecessary risk in your portfolio.
Yeah, Nathan, to that point, what questions do you think people should ask themselves if they're really considering retirement and whether they have enough money in order to do it? What questions do you think people should ask themselves in this regard?
Yeah, I think the first one is, looking at what you want your retirement to look like, and then reverse engineering how much you need to save to get there. A lot of the time, a good financial advisor have resources to help guide you through this discussion. So if you said to me, Nathan, I want to retire at 55. I want to be able to take 2 vacations a year. That'll cost me, let's say, $10,000 a year in travel expenses. Maybe you want to have, say, a fancy vehicle, a sports car. That's the typical midlife crisis thing that men often do. What do those costs look like, and then how do we plan for those costs? And ultimately, like I said before, just that regular review is huge, because ultimately, if your situation changes, maybe your priorities change, maybe your employment changes, maybe your group plan changes with your company, any of those unexpected changes in your life, we often refer to them as either windfalls, curveballs, or cannonballs. And ultimately, those are the types of things that, when those happen in our lives, reviewing your financial plan is usually a better thing to do sooner than later, because there could be a major change in the way you do things. You talked about a job loss earlier. To me, that's a huge one that could really impact your financial goals.
Yeah, absolutely. And, and Nathan, for yourself personally, and I'm curious to also get your professional opinion on what it really means to retire comfortably, and how do you define a financial discipline? What are your thoughts there?
So in regards to retiring comfortably, I think, that's going to be very different to each person. Like some people, because I've dealt with many, many families, many, many individuals, business owners, corporate professionals, and for different people, their idea of retirement is going to look different. There are some folks, I've worked with clients that enjoy working well into their 70s or maybe even in their 80s, as long as their physical health keeps up with them. There are some people who are, wanting to retire very early and have that flexibility in their lifestyle to, do things that they couldn't do while they were working full time, taking on a hobby, traveling, sitting on maybe boards of like charities or not for profits or things like that. Just figuring out what you want to do that every day that gives you, that feeling of comfort and self actualization. So, and then when it comes to financial discipline, I look at discipline in general as doing the same thing every day, no matter what the circumstances, no matter how you're feeling. And I think ultimately financial discipline is a factor in that when you're financially disciplined to save that money into your RSP or your emergency savings or wherever you're putting that money every month, doing it no matter what the situation. I've had clients in the past who have come to me when maybe the markets were a bit more volatile. They're concerned about how things are going. They want to make big moves with their portfolio. We try to encourage them as best we can to, not make those decisions in those times. I'll give you an example. We had one, a couple of years ago, there was a major downturn in the market. One of my clients wanted to move everything directly into cash, which at that time rates were still not as high as they are now. So the return wasn't great. And ultimately it did impact their retirement in the long term, because ultimately, those years where they're taking money out of the market when markets are low, because we don't know when markets are going to recover, they could be potentially missing out on some great years of returns, in the future 6 to 12 months.
Yeah, and I'm curious to also ask you about the slogan at Edward Jones, "Built to make a difference." I know it's the slogan, and I'm curious, what do you think that means to you, and why is it something that you keep in the back of your mind every day you go to work?
Well, and I think to me that's the value proposition that makes Edward Jones stand out compared to a lot of the other financial institutions, at least in Canada. A lot of the banks, to me they don't, and this is coming from someone who worked in the banks for 9 years before working with Edward Jones. I found that, Edward Jones is really more focused on the individual and what their values are, versus just making sure that their money grows. Because to me, when I'm working with a client, the why and the what's important to them is really the North Star to me. So if I've got a client who wants to retire at 55, I want to ask questions. Why do you want to retire at 55? Why is that so important to you? What do you see yourself doing at that stage in your life, ideally? And learning a little bit more about, what's important to them from a value perspective, how important is family to them, how important is leisure, all those different things that make each and every one of us unique is, to me, the number one reason of why we do what we do. For a lot of our clients, the money aspect is really not the top priority, but it's what that money gives you: peace of mind, freedom, leisure, be able to spend reason, able to spoil your family, those types of things. So for me, that's what makes us different. That's why we do money differently, because we're more focused on what the money can provide rather than just making sure that the portfolio grows year over year.
Yeah, and Nathan, I'm also curious to ask you whether you think Canadians are getting smarter when it comes to making sound financial decisions. I'm curious to get your thoughts there.
I would say that entirely depends on who you talk to. Like, I would say there are more people making intentional decisions with their money. They're trying to become more in control and in demand of where their money goes. Whether I think that they're always making better decisions or worse decisions, again, I think that goes back to what we were talking about before with where they're getting their information from. There's a lot of great information or even some misinformation out there. I find that some people, are maybe looking at the wrong information, at least for them, and it ends up, setting them back financially. There are some people who are, looking at the tried, tested, and traditional information. And to me, that tends to generate a more consistent result for people versus, nowadays with the information that's out there. I mean, look at all the different types of financial windfalls that we've heard about over the last little while. There's been cryptocurrency. There was the meme stock craze a few years ago. Cannabis stocks were all the rage about 5-6 years ago when cannabis was being legalized in Canada. And so to me, there are people that are looking at those things and looking for those quick windfalls. I'd even put real estate into that category to a certain degree. But I also think that folks that are looking for those quick, easy wins are more likely going to find themselves stumbling along the way. Whereas people who are looking at, maybe not the most exciting or sexy plans or investment strategies, those to me tend to be the more consistent and predictable ways of making sound financial decisions.
Yeah, and Nathan, I want to end on a two-part question and ask you about why you think working in finances rather defines your passion and your purpose. And my friend, when you look at your own personal, professional, and personal legacy, how do you want that to be defined?
Ooh, the legacy part is going to be a big one for me. But as far as why this is my passion and purpose, like I said before, I grew up in a family that didn't have, a lot of financial discussions around the dinner table. We didn't talk about money. My parents often kept that stuff very private from my brother and I. And ultimately, it really hindered my ability to make good financial decisions at a younger age. I also really loved doing things in a entrepreneurial or business focus. I would run lemonade stands as a child. My grandparents who lived on a farm would give us pumpkins every October that we would sell to the neighborhood for Halloween jack-o'-lanterns. And I always found fascinating the idea of like starting a business versus working for somebody else. And so to me, that was the passion and purpose that got me into this. Between the lack of information I received as a child and the fact that I was always interested in being somewhat of an entrepreneur, those two things have really, directed me where I am now. As far as what my own legacy is, I just immediately I first think to what do I want my practice to be? Generally speaking, I'm looking at a practice where I want to be able to serve about 100 to 400 families of professionals and business owners. Ideally, I would love to have 1 to 2 people on my support team. I have one right now. At some point in the next little while, I want to hire a second one when we get to that point, and really just make our practice a practice that is easily referable from our clients. I want our clients to feel like if I can look after them, their friends and family can be just as well looked after, and they're willing to come to us and say, hey, my coworker, my cousin, my brother, my friend, they need to talk to someone like you, because ultimately they're going to be in a similar situation, have similar questions, concerns, etc. And I just want to make sure I can help as many people as I can. And then ultimately, I want my business to be something that I can not only use to create a lifestyle for my family that we're happy with where we're living, but maybe even down the road when my kids are older, I would love one of them or both of them to, take over the practice when I'm no longer wanting to practice my business anymore.
Yeah, absolutely. And just before I ask you how people can get in contact with you or Edward Jones specifically, I had one other question that popped in my head that I wanted to make sure I asked you about. And, we often hear about sort of the kitchen table issues, and you alluded to this earlier in our discussion this morning, but I'm curious to get your opinion on why it's important to have those kitchen table issues And whether you think Canadians are doing a better job of really putting themselves in a financial position to succeed. So, how important do you think having those kitchen table conversations really is?
That's the like kitchen table conversations in general. I think more and more families see the value in having open, candid conversations. When it comes to the financial piece specifically, I find myself in a viewpoint where, it really hasn't gotten a lot better, because we've had this multi-generational issue where education, especially in Ontario and Canada, is not focusing on financial literacy, is not teaching me how to be, or teaching people, I should say, how to be financially, savvy and independent. And, the problem is that if I wasn't taught it, my father wasn't taught it, and then let's say hypothetically my grandfather wasn't taught it, how much of that information can we intelligently share with each other around the kitchen table? I think the problem is that we've created this, we've almost become a victim of, lack of information over so many years. And now people think that financial independence or financial wealth generation is something that you can easily do by finding the right business or finding the right investment and finding the right opportunity. Those are like a 1 in 1,000 chance of even happening to the average person, maybe even tighter, maybe even lower chances. So I would say, it's good that we're having more of the conversations, but we also need to be having the right conversations. I've heard so many times where, especially younger clients, folks that I'll say, maybe 30 and younger, they'll come to me and they'll say, my parents taught me about this type of investment, or they'll help people make the most prudent decisions that they can with the most information, while also making sure that we're not taking unnecessary risk. We're getting regular returns and performance on their money, and we want to make sure that they're getting themselves closer to those goals at the end of the day, not further behind.
Yeah, absolutely. And finally, Nathan, tell me if people want to get connected with you personally or Edward Jones, what's the best way they can do that?
Best way to reach me usually is on LinkedIn. I'm on there almost daily. Just look me up, LinkedIn, Nathan Best. I'm a handsome guy, a little bit more scruff in my picture right now, but I'll probably be getting that change in the next little bit. You can also call the office, 905-304-4565. We are in Ancaster, Ontario, licensed in the province of Ontario. And then also you can, email me directly, nathan.best@edwardjones.com. If you're interested in just learning more about our firm in general, you can visit us at edwardjones.ca. We've got lots of great free resources and ways to find the right advisor for you and your family.
Absolutely, my friend. And I want to thank you for the work that you do to help people successfully plan for retirement and a flexible financial future, my friend. And I want to thank you this morning for engaging in conversation with me. It's most appreciated.
Well, like I said, Kevin, thank you so much for all you're doing to help people in your community, and I appreciated the invitation to come on here.